Hey guys, tonight we slip through the creaking gate of a long-forgotten medieval cloister where the walls are high, the hours are quiet, and the vegetables are surprisingly political. You're wearing a heavy wool robe that scratches at the collar and clings to your arms, and as your sandals scrape across the worn flagstones, you can already smell the sweet tang of herbs growing nearby. But wait, wits, that sharper scent beneath the lavender and thyme, could that be onions? You're going to want to brace yourself, because despite the peaceful chanting and the spotless stone floors, monastic life is not exactly spa day. With scripture, you'll be cold, hungry, possibly reprimanded for humming during Vespers, and you probably won't survive this week's root vegetable ration, let's be honest. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from a tiny town in the Alps or a big city in the heat of summer, drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always lovely to see where the cloister reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You enter the cloister at dawn, stepping into a hush that feels almost alive. The outer world, its noise, its messes, its markets and midwives and tax collectors falls away the moment the gate thuds closed behind you. In here, it's just you, the sisters, and the rule of Saint Benedict, to be precise. A 6th century monastic instruction manual that governs everything from how many times you eat to how many words you're allowed to speak. Spoiler alert, it's not many. This place is built for prayer, contemplation, and labor. And you, being the newest arrival, will be doing rather a lot of the latter. Your assigned task, the garden, it seems, harmless enough. You're led by a silent, hooded sister, her breath puffing visibly in the morning, chill past the dormitory and refectory to a small iron gate. Beyond it lies the cloister garden, walled on all sides, dappled with fog, and already stirring with quiet life. Raised beds run in tidy rows. Herbs cling to the stone edges like secrets. There's a rosemary bush that looks older than sin, and in the middle, a modest fountain gurgles, catching the early light. You get to work, digging, trimming, fetching water from the well. You're not alone to other novices dig nearby, their fingers red from cold earth, but no one speaks. The only sound is the crunch of gravel and the occasional flap of a habit in the wind. By midday, your hands are blistered and your knees sore. A small stone bench beneath a fig tree offers brief relief. You bite into the crust of your coarse brown bread and stare at a curious patch in the garden. It's set apart, shadowed by a trellis, and it smells ... familiar. At first, you don't dare ask. But as the days pass and your muscles stop aching quite so much, you begin to notice things. Sister Beatrix Stern, grey-haired, and in charge of the garden, always lingers a moment too long by that patch. Her apron pockets bulge after she visits it, and once, when she thought no one was watching, you saw her bend down and brush the soil with her hand, almost reverently. The plants in that patch are leafy, tall, and shaped just oddly enough to make you curious, but they're not labeled. Every other plant in the garden has a neat wooden tag. Salvia officinalis, Menther piperita, Phoeniculum vulgar. This one, nothing. And then, one day, when Sister Beatrix is helping someone inside, you finally sneak close. You lean down, you part the leaves, you press your fingers into the soil, you find the bulb, round, pale, pungent, definitely an onion, 1,000 questions bloom in your mind at once, like daisies in a graveyard. Are onions forbidden? Why? Who planted these? Is this a vegetable? Conspiracy. You return to your chores and try to act normal. But suddenly, the garden feels less like a holy space and more like a stage where everyone knows their lines, but no one says what they mean. That evening, in the refectory, you glance around the long table. The sisters sip their thin, leek broth. Eyes lowered, no one speaks. The rule allows for only essential words. And did you know we're harboring illegal onions? Probably doesn't qualify, but you do catch a look. Across the table, Sister Beatrix meets your eyes for a single heartbeat. Not a glare, not quite a warning. More like ... Welcome, here's the thing. Historians still argue whether onions were ever explicitly banned in medieval convents. Some say it was merely discouraged due to its pungency and rumored link to carnal desires, because of course, medieval theology would blame lust on lunch. Others believe the forbidden onion stories are exaggerated, born of later moral panics and overly romantic histories. But then again, the monastic rule has entire sections about laughing too much, so it's not hard to believe onions got a suspicious side eye. What we do know is this: onions were associated with appetite. Appetite was associated with the body, and the body, to a woman trying to transcend earthly temptation, was a whole philosophical minefield. That doesn't mean onions were never eaten. Just ... not officially ... and that garden patch. That's not a mistake. It's not even particularly unique. Across medieval Europe, nuns quietly grew what they needed, what they liked, and occasionally, what they weren't supposed to. Your new life in the cloister is going to be quieter than you ever imagined, but also much spicier than the church intended. And so, as the bells toll for Compline, and you lie in your narrow wooden bed, the scent of crushed time still on your hands, you can't help wondering, what else are these quiet women hiding in the garden? By the next morning, you can't help it. The onion patch is all you can think about. As you rise in the chill of pre-dawn, slipping on your coarse robe and brushing straw from your sleeves, your mind is already in the soil beneath those green stalks. Among the hidden bulbs, you trudge out with the others in silence, joining the bleary-eyed line of novices who shuffle toward the garden gate. The iron squeals faintly as Sister Beatrix swings it open. She doesn't look at you, but you feel the smallest nod from her direction, like a page turning quietly in a book. Today, she assigns you the western quadrant closer to the medicinal herbs, away from the onions. Coincidence? Maybe, but it's hard not to feel like you've been redirected on purpose, as if someone's trying to test whether you're trustworthy. You kneel in the dew-soaked grass beside a sprawling bed of comfrey, yanking weeds with half-hearted diligence while you sneak glances toward the forbidden corner. There's a rhythm here. Everything in this cloister has rhythm. The bells, the prayers, even the garden seems to breathe in hourly cycles, and each cycle teaches you something new. This morning, it's about the Ordo Hortorum, the garden rulebook handed down with monastic precision. Every abbey had its own variation, but most followed the model laid out centuries ago: structured beds of herbs and vegetables, organized by purpose. Medicinals closest to the infirmary, food crops near the kitchen door, fragrant herbs near the cloister walk for reflection, but nowhere does it mention a patch of onions hidden under vines. That alone is strange. Stranger still is How neatly this place seems designed for both control and discretion. The walled garden hides secrets well. No one from the outside can see in. And inside, no one speaks unless absolutely necessary. You're beginning to realize that silence doesn't mean there's nothing going on. It means everything is happening quietly. By mid-morning, your fingers are sore from weeding, and your stomach growls audibly, earning you a raised eyebrow from Sister Imelda, 2 beds over. You mouth an apology, then return to work with exaggerated piety, like a child caught dipping into the jam. And then, in a small act of defiance, you take a detour. You pretend to fetch a watering jug from the shed, but loop past the shadowed trellis again. Today, it's not empty. Sister Beatrix is kneeling there, whispering to the soil. You freeze. She looks up, unbothered, and raises a dirt-smudged finger to her lips. Then shockingly she beckons you over. You glance around. No one's watching. Or, if they are, there, pretending not to be. You step softly over, heart hammering like you're sneaking out of a feast with the cook's best goose. She doesn't speak, just hands you a trowel and nods to the soil. You kneel beside her, and for a moment you dig in tandem, the silence full of meaning. Then she murmurs, barely audible, the rule says nothing about flavor. And just like that, you're in. From then on, you begin to understand the true rhythm of the cloister, the surface rules, and the quiet understanding beneath them. It's not rebellion, exactly. It's more like ... survival. You learn how the garden's layout is a language all its own. Certain beds are public, ceremonial, meant to show the bishop that the nuns are obedient cultivators of cabbage and Christ. Others are practical, tucked near the kitchen for ease of harvest. But a few, like the onion patch, seem to exist outside the official plan. You even hear whispers about a lost ledger, a sort of underground garden journal that maps the unspoken truth of what really grows where. But of course, no one admits to having seen it. Historians still argue whether such ledgers existed, or whether they're a product of later Romanticism. But in places like this, you begin to suspect history doesn't always write itself down. Sometimes it grows and rows, and gets pulled up before the record keepers arrive. One day, while pruning back a feverfew plant, you spot Sister Clara pressing something into the soil behind the compost bins. She catches your eye and smiles, then walks away as if nothing happened. Later, you sneak over and unearth it, a single shallot, neatly nestled, with a faint cross carved into its skin. You rebury it respectfully, not sure whether you've witnessed a prayer, a prank, or a little of both. Meanwhile, the garden continues to hum with quiet life. Bees drift lazily between the mint blossoms. A robin perches on the wall and scolds you for existing. And the sun shifts gently overhead, casting golden light across rows of thyme, savory, and marigolds. You learn the names of things, good King Henry, Bethany, Alexander's, plants with names like folk songs. Some of them help headaches, some settle the stomach, and some according to whispered Lorencourage visions of saints or uncommonly vivid dreams. And onions. Supposedly they awaken the blood, whatever that means. Certainly they stir something. Every time you pass the hidden patch, there's a faint thrill in your chest. Not fear, exactly. More like ... companionship. You're no longer just a novice tending approved vegetables. You're part of a centuries-old whisper network of women who grew what they weren't supposed to and made soup out of it. And just between us, it's the best soup you've ever had. Asterisk, you're scrubbing turnips when the lecture begins. It's a chilly afternoon in the refectory, and your hands are purple from cold water and root skins. The sisters are seated in quiet rows at long tables, your bowl of lentils untouched in front of you. At the far end, Abbess Matilda is reading aloud from De Proprietate Booth Rerum, a hefty 13th century encyclopedia that covers everything from birds to bodily fluids. Today's topic, onions. You perk up. And so, the onion, when consumed in excess, she intones in that gentle, gravelly cadence you're learning to find oddly comforting, is known to excite humours, particularly choler and phlegm, and may provoke unseemly stirrings of the flesh. Unseemly stirrings. You try not to smirk. You glance at Sister Beatrix. She's staring at the abbess with a look of polite blankness, spoon halfway to her mouth, her face as serene as an altar cloth. But her foot taps ever so slightly beneath the table. Tap, tap, tap. The abbess continues. It is therefore recommended that such root vegetables be consumed sparingly, if at all, by those dedicated to spiritual purity. Right, that explains it. You'd heard whispers. You'd pieced together the strange absence of onions in the official kitchen garden. But here, in the open, is the first confirmation. Onions were not forbidden by law, but by ... implication. Reputation, the lingering, leaky suspicion that they were a little too bodily, a little too flavorful, a little too much. Historians still debate whether this fear of onions was widespread or just the exaggerated fixation of a few fussy clerics. Some point to lists of monastery supplies where onions appear without shame. Others note that no less a figure than Hildegard of Bingen advised caution, saying onions made the eyes heavy and the mind sluggish. But others called them holy, protective, even cleansing. Apparently, it depends on whether you're planning a meal or an exorcism. You return to your dormitory that night and lie awake, your thoughts drifting not toward the Psalms or the lessons of humility, but toward that sharp, honest scent that clings to your fingertips after weeding the onion bed the next morning. You walk past the official garden chart posted near the well. It lists lactuca, beta vulgaris, pastinaca, even allium porum leeks, which apparently get a pass, but no sign of allium cepa, the humble onion. And yet, it's growing. You begin to wonder what other ingredients have been quietly slipped back into this cloister over the centuries. What else has been discouraged but not truly banished? Are there cloves tucked into the spice shelf under the name church bark? Is someone fermenting elderflower under the guise of penitential tonic? One afternoon, while sorting dried herbs in the cellar, you come across a curious bundle. It's wrapped in cloth and labelled in an unfamiliar hand. Ad lumen ocularum, for the light of the eyes. Inside are 3 small onions cured to papery perfection and tied with a ribbon of blue thread. You bring it to Sister Beatrix. She examines it, touches the thread, and says, Sister Magdalene's handwriting. She passed 3 winters ago. And then, as if explaining why someone would leave behind a secret stash of onions, she simply adds, she couldn't stand beets. That night, you think of Magdalene, of how she, like you, must have come here young, awkward, full of good intentions and goosebumps, and how she must have found comfort not in scripture, necessarily, but in taste, texture, a garden patch where things made sense. And apparently, in onions, it's easy to think of medieval nuns as living purely for heaven. But the truth is always more ... grounded. They had stomachs, cravings, days when the porridge was thin and the prayers too long, and in a world that demanded silence and self-denial, Onions must have tasted like something you weren't supposed to have, but deeply needed, like a secret you could swallow. You find yourself taking longer with the harvest now, gently brushing soil from the bulbs, letting them breathe in the shade before gathering them in your apron. The trellis that once seemed shadowy now feels like a shield one that guards not just onions, but choices. And there's something else you've noticed. The other novices, the ones who arrived with you, are starting to catch on. One offers to water the shady corner. Another lingers a bit too long near the compost, nose twitching at a familiar scent. No one says it out loud. That would spoil the spell. But you're not the only one drawn to the secrets beneath the soil. In this place of rule and ritual, of sacred time and ordered beds, the onion is more than food. It's a question. What exactly are you allowed to want? Asterisk, you're weeding the lavender beds when you hear the giggle. It's quick, soft, half-stifled, and definitely not permitted. You glance around. 2 rows over, Sister Juliana is crouched by the shadowed trellis, one hand over her mouth, the other holding something round and dirt-dusted. Another onion. She tucks it quickly into the pocket of her apron and resumes pruning as if nothing happened. But her ears are flushed pink, and now you're sure this isn't just a gardening project anymore. It's a network, a quiet system of hands and glances, of bulbs slipped into baskets under bunches of legal herbs, of meals that taste slightly better than the rules should allow, because somehow, despite the vigilance of the abbess and the ancient garden charts, the onions are thriving. You spend that afternoon turning soil in the far bed legally cabbage, unofficially leeks and something spicier, and you realize you've stopped questioning why. You already know it's not about flavor. Not entirely. It's about ... room to remember who you are when no one's watching, when the bells aren't ringing, when the rule says, do not eat for pleasure, and your stomach says, but maybe just one more bite. The onions are a soft rebellion, a crunchy whisper of control. They are, in a word, yours, and they weren't easy to grow. Sister Beatrix shows you one afternoon how carefully the bulbs are rotated, how each patch is shifted slightly year to year to avoid suspicion and rot. Too much shade, and they'll mold. Too much sun, and they'll flower prematurely. The soil must be forked just so, the drainage perfect, the mulch thin but steady. They are tended with more precision than the chapel candles. Beatrix leans over one bed, brushing her knuckles across the tiny green shoots, and mutters, "They say the devil rides in strong flavors." She pauses. "Then I hope he likes stew." And then she smiles, a rare thing, and hands you a hand-drawn garden map. It's old, ink faded, edges torn, but it clearly shows the Cloister garden from 50 years ago, and in the northwest corner, a tiny scribble, Allium hush. Your breath catches. Historians still debate how much autonomy medieval nuns truly had in their gardens. Some argue that abbesses enforced strict compliance with the rule, down to the very seeds planted. Others point to convent records filled with strange omissions, irregular plantings, and unusual medicinal brews that suggest far more freedom than was officially recorded. Here, in your lap, is a quiet piece of that autonomy, passed hand to hand, folded into apron pockets, pressed into books no one but the sisters ever read. You trace the lines of the map with your finger, then tuck it safely into your robe. That evening, after prayers and the long hush of Compline, you walk the garden. Once more under the moon, everything is silvered. The leaves glint like mirrors. The fountain murmurs like a dream just out of reach. And there, beneath the trellis, the onion patch glows, faintly it stalks, nodding in the night breeze. Defiant and alive, you kneel beside it and place your hand to the soil, warm, breathing, alive, not just food, memory, legacy, a flavor. The rule tried to forget. As you stand and turn back toward the dormitory, you catch a shadow moving behind the far hedgerow. Sister Juliana, again, or maybe Clara. It's hard to say. She doesn't speak, just lifts a single onion in silent greeting before slipping back into the night. You smile, because this garden is no longer just a place of labor. It's a story written in roots, and the next chapter. It's already growing. You're shelling peas in the shade when Sister Beatrix begins humming. It's not a hymn, you're certain of that. It's something older, earthier, a tune that rises and falls like a row of hills, the kind of melody that slips between rules. Without breaking them, she stops mid-note, tosses a few pods into the basket, and says, "Sister Matilda used to hum that when we hid the first row." You blink. The first row. She looks at you, amused. You thought this was new. The peas tumble through your fingers as you stare. Of course, you didn't think this was new, but you hadn't fully grasped how deep the onion beds really went. Sister Beatrix leans back on her heels and taps a dirt-stained finger to her temple. My first summer, 38 years ago, there was an elder sister with fingers like twigs and a laugh like thunder. Grew shallots the size of apples. We all swore we'd never tell. She tosses another pod into the basket and shrugs. Turns out we all told someone. That's when it hits you. This garden isn't hiding a single act of rebellion. It's preserving a tradition, passed on like a litany of flavor and defiance. A sacred, savory rite that predates most of the dormitory's roof tiles. You ask her, "Why onions?" She sighs. They keep well. They heal cuts. They flavor everything. They survive winter. She doesn't say it, but you understand. They're like the women who grow them. Sister Beatrix rises and brushes her knees off. "Come on, you're helping with the kitchen stocks." You follow her inside, down the cool, echoing hallway, into the cramped storeroom near the kitchen hearth. Bins of dried lentils, jars of fermented greens, a stack of nettle-wrapped cheese wheels that smell like socks and miracles. And then, beneath a folded linen cloth in a crate labeled beets, she pulls back the veil. Onions, dozens of them, all shapes and colors, some tied with twine, others tucked in straw, a few carved lightly with tiny crosses or initial signatures left by proud, anonymous hands. You crouch beside the crate, amazed. It's like a treasure chest, not of gold, but of garlic's softer cousin. Beatrix begins sorting them without ceremony. We rotate them into stews, a bit here, a bit there, always just enough to go unnoticed. You help her select a few. A yellow one with fine roots, a red one that's beginning to blush purple. She hands you a paring knife. "See this mark," she says, pointing to a faint bruise. "That's frostbite from poor storage. Means it'll sweeten fast once cooked." You nod, carefully peel. Historians still argue, she mutters, peeling alongside you, whether we nuns were obedient gardeners or sly herbalists, whether we followed the rule or found ways around it. She chuckles. Truth is, we did both. Same hands planting the psalms and the parsley. You laugh quietly with her. Then she adds, "What's sacred isn't the seed, it's the choice." That night, in the refectory, you recognize the flavor. It's subtle, buried beneath the lentils, and bitter greens but unmistakable. Onion, a quiet heat that warms the mouth and the memory. You glance at the long table. The sisters eat in silence, heads bowed. But there's something different now. A flicker in the eyes, the faintest curl of a smile. Not indulgence, just recognition, shared knowledge. This isn't about breaking rules. It's about tending what grows beneath them later as you walk back to the dormitory under the stars. You think again of Sister Matilda and her apple-sized shallots, of all the novices who passed through this cloister, quietly passing down recipes and root secrets. A monastic cookbook written not on parchment, but in muscle memory, in the touch of a hand on a bulb. The way the knife moves, the scent that rises from a pot at just the right hour, and somewhere in all of this the rule, the rot, the root cellar, you find something holy, asterisk, the bell rings before dawn. But you're already awake, lying still beneath your coarse woolen blanket, thinking about those onions, not just the bulbs themselves, but everything they've come to mean. Warmth, care, quiet, defiance, and a kind of monastic inheritance, no scriptorium ever recorded. You dress quickly in the half-dark and follow the shuffle of sandals to Lord's. The chapel is cold and dim, the air tinged with incense and damp stone. You chant the psalms, mouth moving automatically, but your mind still lingers in the garden. You can almost taste the stew from last night. After prayers, Sister Agnes intercepts you in the corridor. "You'll be joining Sister Ursula today," she says, tone brisk. In the herbarium, you nod. Another transfer. You've learned not to ask why. Sister Ursula waits for you by the south wall, wrapped in layers and smelling faintly of vinegar and thyme. She doesn't greet you, just hands you a basket, a pair of shears, and a warning. Don't touch the wolfsbane. The herbarium is half wild. A crumbling wall of stone borders it on 3 sides, and thorny vines have claimed the 4th. Raised beds overflow with tangled greens, each labelled with ink-faded slates, comfrey, feverfew, valerian, horehound, but near the wall, half hidden beneath a row of broad-leafed sorrel. You spot them again, onions, not many, just a handful of slender stalks, but they're unmistakable. Sister Ursula notices your stare. She doesn't say anything at first, just snips a sprig of savory and drops it in your basket. Then it's not about flavor. You wait, she continues, slow and even. It's about balance. Onions, dry dampness, warm the gut, strengthen the blood. You blink, that's not in the rule. She huffs, neither is sneezing. Then she walks away. You follow, shears in hand, and begin trimming the lemon balm under her instructions. She speaks rarely, but when she does, it's precise. Plantain leaf, heals bites, motherwort, calms the pulse. Tansy use sparingly, unless you want to see God early. You learn by rhythm, cut, collect, sort. It's not like the cloister garden, where laughter and secrets tucked into soil. This place hums with purpose, controlled, intense, like a silent apothecary waiting to be awakened. Later that afternoon, she leads you inside to a cramped room that smells of old honey and mildew. Jars line every shelf, filled with liquids in shades of amber, green, and rust. Bundles of drying herbs hang from the rafters like sleeping bats. She takes a mortar and begins crushing something dark and fibrous. You lean in, onion, dried, crumbled, pungent. She adds honey and a pinch of mustard seed, grinds it all into a paste. For poultices, she says, good for lung rot and kitchen burns. You hadn't realized onions could be used for healing, too. You'd only seen them cooked, or hidden, or whispered about. But now you see another layer: medicine, not mischief. Historians still argue. Sister Ursula mutters as she stirs the mixture, whether we knew what we were doing or if it was all guesswork and superstition. She licks the pestle, smacks her lips. Guesswork tastes better than most doctors, if you ask me. You stifle a laugh. She packages the paste into a small crock and writes something in elegant Latin on a strip of parchment. Her penmanship is delicate, controlled, far neater than her gardening. You wonder how long she's been doing this. Decades, probably. Maybe since she was your age, kneeling in the same weeds as the sun sets. She hands you the jar and says, "Take." This too, Sister Heloise. She burned her hand on the oven door. You cradle the pot like it's precious, because it is. You find Sister Heloise in the scriptorium, trying to turn pages with one hand. Her other is wrapped in a damp cloth. She looks up, startled. You're from the herbarium. You nod, hand her the jar. She opens it, sniffs, and smiles. Ursula's miracle mash. You help her apply it. She winces, then sighs. It smells. Terrible, she says, but it works. You sit with her a while, watching her copy a psalm with her good hand. Her script is careful, each letter rising like a prayer. Funny, she murmurs, how an onion can sit at the edge of everything. You tilt your head, in the dirt, in the broth, in the cure, always hidden, but always there. You smile, bye. Now, you're starting to understand. Onions weren't just an ingredient. They were a presence, a constant, just like prayer. Just like the bell, even if no one ever wrote about them in the rule. Asterisk confessions without words who return to the scriptorium the next morning, not as a patient or courier, but as a student. Sister Heloise requested your presence, though she didn't say why. She simply handed you a rag and a pale wooden board and said, "We're cleaning parchment today. Quiet work for a quiet soul." And so, side by side, you scrape stretched sheets of vellum with crescent-bladed knives, slowly clearing the last bits of hair and dust. You work in silence. The only sounds, the slow rasp of steel on hide and the occasional creak of a chair or rustle of robes as other nuns copy their texts above you. The windows cast long bars of light on the wooden floor, and the smell of ink, wax, and drying glue hangs heavy in the air. It's almost too peaceful until you notice what's written on the page Sister Heloise has been working on. It's not a psalm, not a hymn, not even Latin. It's a recipe. You lean closer. At the top margin, carefully hidden between two ruled lines of Psalm 44. In the tiniest script you've ever seen, someone has written for a stew to warm the weary, dried onion, coriander, sage, a whisper of garlic, no more than a whisper. She notices your gaze, but doesn't flinch. "I didn't write that," she says casually. "It was already there." You raise an eyebrow. "Well," she admits, "not me personally, but one of us, years ago." She lifts the page, holds it to the light. This was Sister Armelina's work. Long dead now, but she left ... suggestions. You smile. She also left a pickled plum recipe in the back of the Book of Kings. Heloise adds, and a warning never to mix rosemary with goat. So this was their secret. Confessions without words. Recipes tucked between psalms. Observations slipped beside genealogies. Gentle heresies scribbled in miniature. Preserved like pressed flowers in the margins of official truth. They didn't need to argue against the rule. They just wrote around it. You begin noticing more of them. A prayer book with faint grease stains. A long Psalm 23, clearly thumbed during meals. A bestiary whose snail illustration had been altered to resemble a leek, complete with tiny roots. A commentary on St. Jerome, with half a page blackened by a spilled onion tincture carefully blotted, not erased. Most fascinating of all is a medical manual tucked behind a wall shelf. When you open it, it flutters, with loose scraps of vellum, each one bearing a variation of the same base. Crushed onion, honey, Wyandotte. You show Sister Ursula later that evening. She nods without surprise. Half the infirmary was built on things like this, she says, leafing through the scraps. But the men who copied the official texts, they didn't think it worthy of record. You return to the scriptorium again the next day. Sister Heloise has cleared a seat for you and laid out tools. Stylus, inkpot, knife, blotter. You copy psalms with a heavy, slanted hand. It's clumsy, but she nods with approval. At some point, she leans over and whispers, if you were to add something in the margin, no one could stop you. You hesitate then. In the lower right-hand corner of Psalm 61, you scratch in a single line, barely visible. Sister Ursula says onion dries dampness. This is probably true. It's not bold, it's not revolutionary, but it feels like stepping into a conversation centuries in the making. Because these confessions weren't about breaking rules, they were about preserving realities, not the kind you can chant in Latin, but the ones you can taste in soup, apply to wounds, tuck into soil before dawn. You realize the scriptorium isn't just a place for scripture. It's a place where truths survive in, the humble ones that smell faintly of sulfur and earth. You think about the future. One day, someone might read your tiny note and smile, and maybe they'll whisper, of course, it's true. Asterisk, you wake early, well before the bells. A thin mist hangs over the cloister garden, and the dew clings to your sandals as you pad across the flagstones. You don't head for prayer. Not today. Instead, you tiptoe past the bee yard, where the hives hum with drowsy promise, and through the side gate that leads to the hidden quadrant of the garden. It's technically just an extension of the herb beds, but you now know better. It's the patch, the onion patch. The smell hits you first, earthy, sharp, and slightly sweet. Not the stench of chopped onions, but something more alive. The green shoots rustle softly in the windless morning, and you crouch down beside them like you might beside a friend. Sister Agnes is already there, kneeling, praying. No dash harvesting. With practiced hands, she pulls up a white bulb, wipes the soil on her apron, and adds it to a wicker basket. She doesn't look up. They're best before the sun warms them, she says, like she was expecting you. You join her. The earth gives easily loamy, rich, long dash tended as you work. Agnes speaks softly, mostly to the onions, it seems. You know there's a reason we grow them in secret, she says. It's not just because they're banned from fasting meals, or that the monks don't approve. You glance at her. It's because they remember, she says. These bulbs hold memories. You plant one, and it remembers its mother bulb. You eat one, and it remembers every hand that nurtured it. You don't say anything, but you feel it. Something ancient and sacred beneath your fingertips, she adds, and they remember us, too. Even when the scrolls forget. That's the real reason, you think, not just nutrition, not just folk cures or flavor. The onions are history. Living, edible, tear-jerking history. Agnes finishes filling her basket and stands. "Come," she says, "let's pickle them before matins." You follow her back to the kitchen, where the air is already thick with vinegar and warm spice. Sister Ursula is there, sleeves rolled, wiping down a ceramic crock with holy determination. A cat watches from the corner, unimpressed. You peel, you slice, you layer, onions, peppercorns, mustard seed, salt. Then you pour the hot vinegar and seal the jar, over and over, jar after jar. No one speaks much. It's like a liturgy, this quiet industry. Later, as the jars cool and you wrap them in cloth, Ursula chuckles. You know what they used to say in Burgundy. She says that a nun with no onion is like a knight with no sword. You laugh. True story, she insists. They even painted it in a marginalia little nun in full habit jousting with a leek. Historians still argue whether it was satire or admiration, adds Agnes with a grin. Either way, we accept the compliment. You think back to the copy of Leviticus Sister Heloise showed you yesterday. The margins filled with faint drawings, a saint roasting onions over a fire, a garden with rows labeled in secret code, even one sketch of a nun hiding an onion inside a hollow Bible. Brazen, hilarious, possibly treasonous. Did they get in trouble? You'd asked. Sometimes, she said. But mostly they were just ... forgotten. But not anymore. You've helped pickle enough jars to last until winter. You've hidden notes in psalms. You've harvested history with your bare hands. And somewhere, deep in the cellar beneath the apothecary, sit shelves of old crock jars with labels in an indecipherable scroll, but you know what's inside, not just onions. Proof. Later that night, in the dormitory, you lie awake listening to the rhythmic snoring of Sister Adelaide and the creak of the wind in the shutters. You think about what Agnes said, that onions remember, and you wonder if one of these bulbs were to sprout again in 100 years, would it still carry the story of today? Would it hold the scent of Ursula's vinegar, the warmth of Agnes' soil, your fingerprints? Maybe that's the point. Maybe the secret garden isn't just a rebellion. It's a record, not in ink, but in roots. Asterisk, the onion witch trials, by the time. Spring turns the cloister garden into a breathing sea of green. Your days have taken on a strange rhythm, half rule, half root cellar. You attend the offices, yes. You chant the psalms, copy the gospels, bow your head at exactly the right moment when the abbess passes. But beneath it, all beneath the prayers and pageantry, you've become part of something older, quieter, and far more fragrant. You're now a full member of what Sister Ursula, only half joking, calls the Order of the Onion. She even made you a badge, a small onion carved from beeswax, tied with a thread of sage-green yarn. It smells faintly of soup, but today, as you sip a mild onion broth laced with lovage and dandelion root, a new story unfurls around the hearth. It begins with a name, Sister Cunigund of Cluny. Cunigund, says Ursula, setting her spoon down with gravity, was no ordinary nun. She was what we call agriculturally ambitious. You raise an eyebrow. Sister Agnes nods solemnly. She didn't just grow onions, Agnes adds. She bred them. She cross-pollinated wild allium varieties in secret. She journaled in code, and according to some she made them speak Latin. You blink. She trained onions. You ask. Ursula grins. No, dear, that part's almost certainly satire, but the rest is real. Apparently, Cunigund was the head gardener at a convent in Burgundy sometime in the Early 1100s. Her garden produced miraculous yields. Her stews were legendary. Her skin was said to glow like an alabaster turnip. But more importantly, she was audacious. She wrote an entire treatise on the spiritual symbolism of root vegetables, arguing that onions embodied divine mystery, hidden beneath layers, flavor born from decay, tears that heal rather than wound. She cited Gregory the Great. She quoted Hildegard. She even boldly compared the structure of the onion to the Holy Trinity. That's where the trouble began. She circulated copies of her essay among Benedictine abbots, says Agnes, but one of them took offense at her comparison. You can imagine onions, the Trinity, in the same paragraph. Within months, a quiet inquiry was launched. A delegation of monks arrived to inspect her writings and her garden. They didn't find her onions right away, says Ursula, but they did find something else. She pauses, eyes glinting. A chicken, you stare. A chicken. Agnes nods. It was wearing a little hat. Ursula adds, and it had been trained to peck at illustrations in her manuscript, always choosing the onion over the leek. That was the final straw, Agnes says. They said it was witchcraft, a vegetable cult, possibly heretical poultry. The ensuing trial was unofficial but scathing. Cunigund was stripped of her title and sent to a distant convent near the marshes where no known allium grew. Her garden was torn up, her bulbs burned, her treatise banned. But, whispers Ursula, a few copies survived. One of them, possibly, may live beneath our library stairs. You look at her, you read it. She shrugs. Not read. But I've admired the binding. That night, as the wind howls and the rafters creak, you lie awake thinking of Cunigund alone in her cold marshland cell, dreaming of layers and flavor and chickens in tiny hats, and you wonder what's worse, being accused of witchcraft over onions, or having your best ideas turned into a bedtime story no one believes, but here. In this cloister, the story is alive. The pickled jars, the coated margins, the late-night stews that make people hum with quiet joy. Cunigund may have been exiled, but her onions, they found sanctuary * by midsummer. The cloister air is thick with bees and basil. The garden has reached its full crescendo, lambs, ear, and chamomile spilling between beds of lettuces, poppies nodding above pea tendrils, and the onions. Oh, the onions! They grow in precise rows, braided with companion herbs to ward off pests and evil glances. Some are tall and regal, their stalks almost architectural. Others are squat and bulbous, hiding like gossip beneath the soil. And one, which Sister Ursula insists is a direct descendant of Cunigund's lineage, grows in a suspicious spiral like it's plotting something. But tonight, the garden is quiet. You're seated on the low stone wall, the heat of the day still. Lingering in the stone, the air tinged with lavender and something sharper, perhaps vinegar. Sister Agnes joins you with a sigh and a satchel that clinks, I think. She says, "We're ready." You blink at her. For what? She smiles. The exchange? It turns out the nuns of your convent don't merely grow onions. They trade them once every summer under the guise of a pilgrimage to a neighboring abbey. Two sisters journey outward with carefully selected goods, bundles of herbs, jars of preserved garlic scapes, medicinal infusions, and the crown jeweler satchel of hand-tied onions, some painted with religious symbols, others labeled with a system of dots and lines. You're told not to interpret too literally. Each year, explains Ursula, emerging from the shadows with a small wax tablet, we exchange for foreign specimens: Italian shallots, Byzantine, chives, Welsh walking onions, anything genetically interesting, within reason. You squint at her. Is this allowed? She shrugs. Well, technically, we're exchanging surplus produce. The rule encourages economy. We're just particularly botanically inclined. The route is plotted like a spy mission. You and Sister Agnes will leave at dawn, veiled and humble, carrying prayer scrolls and a basket of Saint figurines. The onions, wrapped in linen and nestled in hay, will be hidden beneath. It's a quiet abbey, Agnes says. Their Cistercian, very serious, but their abbess has a soft spot for pickled bulbs. You fall asleep that night, imagining yourself as a medieval smuggler, cloak flapping in the wind, chased through the forest by Inquisition squirrels. The next morning, your sandals crunch along the gravel path as you step beyond the convent gates. For the first time in months, the world feels enormous. Trees too tall, sky too blue. A bee nearly collides with your veil. The walk takes hours, broken only by a modest lunch of hard cheese and suspiciously garlicky oatcakes. The sun is fierce. Your feet complain. Agnes complains more. But finally, in the late light of afternoon, you glimpse it a squat, mossy complex surrounded by apple trees and goats. You are met by a tall nun with a scar on her chin and a gaze that feels like she's already memorized your entire soul. This is Sister Marguerite, Agnes says. She is a collector. Marguerite leads you through a garden nearly identical to your own, but stranger. The scents are unfamiliar: sharp fennel, pungent tarragon, something citrusy and almost aggressive. You've brought the Vulgate shallots, she asks. Agnes nods, and a jar of candied scapes. Marguerite disappears into a cellar and returns with a bulb that glows like a candle flame and smells faintly of mint. This, she says reverently, is allium sanctum. It looks, frankly, like a normal onion, but Agnes bows. We accept. The trade is quick, silent, almost reverent. No coin exchanges hands. Just two women swapping the secret offspring of centuries-old culinary schemes. As you leave, Sister Marguerite presses something into your palm, a folded paper, sealed with wax. Plant that, she says, in the northeast corner, only under a full moon. You don't open it until hours later, back within your own cloister. The stars beginning to wink over the roofline dot inside, 6 tiny seeds, and a note that reads, for the onion that tastes like spring rain, do not cook, ever. Historians still argue whether medieval nuns engaged in clandestine botanical exchanges. There are no records of such trades, only patterns in the plants, whispers in the recipes, and the occasional foreign sprig growing mysteriously in an otherwise local bed. But you've seen it now, felt the seeds in your hand, and as the cloister gates close behind you, you know something else too. You've crossed a threshold, from novice to gardener, from listener to keeper, and in your apron pocket, beneath a clean handkerchief, the onion glows quietly against your hip. Asterisk moonlit harvests and whispered recipes, the summer wanes gently, like a candle that refuses to gutter out. Mornings begin cooler now, and the first fingers of fog curl across the cloister lawn like they're hunting something forgotten. You wake earlier, the garden stirs later, and that's how you begin to notice them: whispers in the kitchen, shadows in the hall, the scent of hot oil and roasted leek drifting down the nave long after Conklin, when all is meant to be still. One night, Just past the feast of Saint Rufina, you wake with a start, no reason, no sound, but something in the air feels warm. Alive, you follow it, through the dormitory, down the old passage with the crumbling arch, past the chapel where only the sanctuary lamp flickers. The kitchen door is ajar. Inside the hearth glows low and golden. Iron pots clatter gently, and they're surrounded by baskets of chopped roots, bruised herbs, and too many onions to explain our Sister Ursula, Sister Agnes, and Sister Beatrix. They're laughing. Ah, look who's found us, Agnes grins. Pull up a stool. You hesitate. Aren't we breaking some kind of rule? Ursula waves a spoon at you. Only the ones worth breaking. We call it the midnight pantry. Apparently, it's a tradition older than any living nun. Each summer only once they gather after hours to cook, share secrets, and eat like the saints didn't recommend. No fasting, no bland barley gruel, no judgment the centerpiece this year. The exchange onions, now caramelizing in goose fat, perfuming the room with something deep and sweet and impossibly comforting. You chop apples, you mash garlic, you stir a pot of lentils so thick it nearly stands upright on its own. No one speaks. Loudly, no one rushes. It's cooking as meditation. And then comes the story-telling. Beatrix tells of her gratant, who once pickled an entire bishop's pantry in protest of a sermon on gluttony. Ursula speaks of her novitiate years when she accidentally grew a 10-pound shallot and hid it in the confessional. Agnes, predictably, just recites long lists of forgotten onion varieties: snowball white bronze beauty, prioress's pearl. You feel like you're part of something sacred, not in the incense and bells way, but in the quiet way, the human way. They teach you recipes not found in any monastery scroll pottage for menstrual cramps. An onion tonic that keeps widows sharp. A syrup of roasted alliums and honey that'll soften even the abbess's heart. None of them written down, only remembered. Spoken aloud. Passed hand to hand with a ladle. Later, bellies full and lids drooping. The sisters sit with you in the scullery, peeling the last of the onions into braided strings for drying. You hum quietly. Agnes whistles. The whole cloister seems to sway, gently in tune. Did the rules say no onions? You ask, sleepily. Ursula shrugs. Depends on the rule and who's writing it. And who's reading it, Agnes adds. And who's cooking it, Beatrix finishes, tossing a skin into the fire that night. As you tiptoe back to your cell with a belly full of forbidden stew and an apron that smells like a garden at midnight, you feel something shift. You realize that history doesn't live in the scriptorium. It lives here in whispered recipes, stained wooden spoons, and the warm hush of shared rebellion under moonlight. And you know you'll be back next year, same time, same hearth, same onion-sweet air,